I was fired for a $5 latte, just hours before closing the biggest deal in company history. But the chill down my spine wasn't from the termination, it was realizing why they needed me gone so fast. 3 days later, the same room where they humiliated me became ground zero for their collapse. By Monday, I understood the truth. I wasn't a liability. I was the safety pin they had foolishly removed. My name is Olivia Ross, and until 20 minutes ago, I was the architect of the most significant revenue stream in the history of Briarline Advisory Technologies. I stood at the head of the mahogany table in Conference Room B, the air conditioning humming a low, artificial drone that did little to combat the aggressive Dallas heat radiating through the floor-to-ceiling glass. My palms were dry. My heartbeat was steady. I had done the work. Across from me sat Elena Markham, the VP of Operations for Crestline Trust and Holdings. She was a woman who wore her reputation like a suit of armor, impenetrable, sharp, and prohibitively expensive. We had spent the last 6 months dancing around terms, compliance hurdles, and integration roadmaps. Today was the day the music stopped. The deal was worth $120 million over 5 years. It was the kind of contract that bought summer homes for partners and kept the lights on for the support staff. It was done. I could see it in the way Elena uncrossed her arms and leaned forward, her eyes finally losing that predatory glint of negotiation. Then came the request that would end my career. "Olivia," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, signaling she was moving from adversary to ally. "If we are going to review these final implementation schedules, I need caffeine, and I do not mean that sludge from the break room machine. It was a test. In high-stakes client management, everything is a test." She wanted to see if I would solve a small problem with the same efficiency I applied to her enterprise architecture. "Consider it done," I said. I stepped out, took the elevator down to the lobby, and walked into the artisan coffee shop that charged rent-level prices for bean water. I ordered 2 lattes, oat milk, extra shot for Elena, black coffee for me. When it came time to pay, I split the transaction. I paid for my drink with my personal debit card. I put Elena's drink $5.25, including tax, on the corporate expense card. It was standard procedure. It was a rounding error. It was a gesture of goodwill to secure a 9-figure contract. I returned to the room. Elena took the cup, took a sip, and smiled. That was the seal. We spent the next hour finalizing the timeline. By 3 in the afternoon, she was shaking my hand. "Get the final DocuSign over to legal." "Olivia," Elena said, gathering her portfolio, "we represent a massive shift for Crestline. I am trusting you personally to steer this ship. Don't make me look foolish. You have my word." I said. Elena left. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind her. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. I had just secured the future of this company. I exhaled, allowing myself a singular moment of pride. The door flew open. It wasn't a celebration. It was Derek Voss. Derek was my line manager, a man whose ambition far exceeded his competence. He walked into the room not with a bottle of champagne, but with a piece of paper gripped so tightly in his hand that the edges were crinkling. He was followed by Melissa Ray from HR, who looked like she would rather be anywhere else on Earth. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew heavy, suffocating, transforming the sleek conference space into something resembling a sterile courtroom. "Derek," I said, reaching for my laptop to close it. "Perfect timing. The Crestline deal is locked." Elena just left. We are green for Monday signing. Derek did not smile. He did not blink. He slammed the paper onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished surface and came to a stop in front of me. It was a printout of a transaction alert. "Explain this," Derek said. His voice was cold, rehearsed. I looked down. It was the notification for the latte. $5.25. "It is a coffee," I said, confused. "For Elena Markham. I just closed the $120 million contract." "Derek," she asked for a latte. "Did you submit a pre-authorization form for client entertainment expenses?" Derek asked. I laughed. I actually laughed, thinking it was a joke. For $5, Derek. The threshold for pre-auth is $50. You know the policy. The policy, Derek said, his voice rising, bouncing off the glass walls, states that all client gratuities must be documented and approved if they fall outside of scheduled dining. This was not a scheduled lunch. This was an unauthorized purchase on a company instrument. I looked at Melissa. She was staring at her shoes. Are you serious? I asked, the blood draining from my face. I just made this company more money than you will see in 10 lifetimes. I bought the client a coffee to seal the deal. I paid for my own. This is about $5. It is about integrity. Olivia, Derek spat. It is about adherence to protocol. If you cannot be trusted with $5, how can we trust you with a client of this magnitude? I am the reason we have this client. I said, my voice hardening. Elena Markham trusts me. The key personnel clause in the contract exists because of me. Derek sneered. It was an ugly expression that twisted his face. Do not flatter yourself. Anyone can do your job. You are a project manager. Olivia, not a god. Do not think spending $5 makes you a hero. You are reckless. You are insubordinate. And we do not tolerate theft. Theft. I repeated the word, feeling the absurdity of it clawing at my throat. You are fired, Derek said. The words hung in the air, suspended in the cold draft of the air conditioner. For cause, he added, driving the knife in. Effective immediately. Melissa has your paperwork. Hand over your badge and your laptop. I looked at him. I looked for the punchline, but there was only the erratic twitch of a muscle in his jaw. He was terrified. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't angry. He was panicked. He needed me gone, and he needed it to happen right now. Before the ink on the Crestline contract was dry, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. A cold clarity settled over me, a defense mechanism honed by a decade in corporate trenches. I realized arguing was pointless because this wasn't an argument. It was an execution. You are making a mistake, I said quietly. Not about me, but about the account. Elena expects me to lead the implementation on Monday. We will handle Elena, Derek said, waving his hand dismissively. Pack your things. You have 10 minutes before security escorts you out. He turned and walked out, leaving the scent of cheap cologne and fear in his wake. Melissa handed me a folder, her hands shaking slightly. I am sorry. Olivia, she whispered. I really am. I didn't answer her. I took the folder. The walk back to my desk felt like a funeral procession of one. The open plan office was silent. They knew. In an office this size, bad news travels faster than light. Heads bowed as I passed. The clicking of keyboards sounded like frantic insects. No one made eye contact. They were all calculating their own survival odds, terrified that whatever contagion I had caught might be airborne. I reached my desk, a small island of personality in a sea of gray. I didn't rush. I unfolded a cardboard box. I placed my framed photo of my sister in it. I packed my ceramic mug. I took my notebook, the personal one, bound in leather, where I kept my own thoughts, not company data. I left the laptop. I left the files. I left the binders of research that had built the Crestline proposal. Derek watched me from his glass-walled office across the floor. He was on the phone, his back turned, but I knew he was watching my reflection in the window. I put on my coat. I picked up the box. It was light. 7 years of work at Briarline Advisory Technologies, and it all fit into a box I could carry with one hand. I walked to the elevator. The metal doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped in and turned around to face the office one last time. Above the reception desk, the Beatty logo, a stylized, aggressive thorn shone in polished steel. They thought they were protecting their bottom line. They thought they were cutting out a loose cannon who played fast and loose with $5. But as the doors began to close, slicing off my view of the empire I had helped build, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a cold, sharp realization. A company that is addicted to its own reputation is usually terrified of the truth. And by firing me today, 3 days before the biggest implementation in their history, they hadn't just saved $5. They had just lit the fuse on a bomb they didn't even know they were sitting on. I pressed the button for the lobby. I didn't cry. I memorized the look of the lobby, the smell of the air, and the face of Derek Voss. The elevator descended, taking me down to street level. But my mind was already racing ahead to Monday. They thought this was the end of the story. They had no idea. They had just written the prologue to their own obituary. My apartment was silent. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot, ringing in the ears with a high-pitched frequency that refuses to fade. I stood in the middle of my living room, the cardboard box from BAT sitting on my kitchen island like an unwelcome guest. I had not turned on the lights. The glow from the street lamps outside filtered through the blinds, casting long prison bar shadows across the hardwood floor. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. Every instinct in my body, every raw nerve ending that had been frayed by the humiliation in the conference room, was screaming at me to pick it up. I wanted to call Elena Markham. I wanted to unleash the torrent of indignation that was building behind my ribcage. I wanted to tell her that Derek Voss was a liar, that BAT was a sinking ship, and that she should run before the ink dried on Monday. But I did not touch the phone. In my line of work, emotion is the enemy of leverage. If I called Elena now, breathless and angry, I would sound exactly like what Derek wanted me to be, a disgruntled, instability-prone employee who had been rightfully terminated for cause. I would be the hysterical woman who got fired over a coffee and could not handle the consequences. Elena was a shark. She respected power, precision, and facts. She did not respect drama. If I was going to make this move, I needed to be surgical. I needed to be cold. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it standing up, staring at the box. Then, I sat down at my personal dining table and opened my personal laptop. I did not have access to the BAT servers anymore. Derek would have had it kill my credentials before I even stepped into the elevator. But I did not need their servers. I was a meticulous archivist of my own work. Every contract draft, every revision, every red-line document that I had worked on at home or sent to my personal email for weekend review was saved on my hard drive. I pulled up the folder labeled Crestline Trust Holdings. I needed to see the language. I knew it by heart, or I thought I did. But memory is a fluid thing when adrenaline is pumping through your veins. I needed to see the black and white reality of what we had built. I scrolled past the pricing schedules, past the service level agreements, and past the technical specifications. I stopped at the section I had fought for tooth and nail 3 months ago. Section 8.4, Key Personnel and Continuity Rider. I leaned in, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. The clause was explicitly clear. It stated that for the initial 12-month implementation period, the primary liaison, specifically named as Olivia Ross, was considered essential to the structural integrity of the project. It went on to say that if the designated key personnel were removed, reassigned, or terminated prior to the completion of the Phase 1 rollout, Crestline reserved the unilateral right to freeze the contract, renegotiate the pricing terms, or void the agreement entirely without penalty. I sat back in my chair. Derek had forgotten, or, more likely, he was so blinded by the immediate need to get me out of the building that he had not bothered to read the fine print of the document he was desperate to claim credit for. He thought the deal was about BAT's technology. He thought it was about the brand. He did not understand that to a client like Crestline, technology is a commodity, trust is the currency, and Elena Markham did not trust the logo in the lobby. She trusted the person who answered her phone at 2 a.m. when the servers crashed. I realized something then, a detail that was so sharp it almost cut. BAT had not signed the contract yet. The signing ceremony was scheduled for Monday morning. Technically, the deal was not closed. However, the reliance was already established. Crestline had already begun allocating internal resources based on the timeline I had created. They had moved teams, adjusted budgets, and prepared their infrastructure based on the guarantee that I would be the one guiding them through the minefield. But there was something else. The math did not add up. Why now? If Derek wanted to fire me, why not wait until Tuesday? Why not wait until the contract was signed? The commission was locked in, And the revenue was on the books. Firing me 3 days before the signature was suicidal. It risked the entire deal. Derek was ambitious. Yes, and he was mediocre. Certainly. But he was not stupid. He knew how to count money, to take a risk this massive. The alternative had to be worse. Keeping me employed until Tuesday must have been more dangerous to them than firing me today. I closed the contract PDF and opened my archive of old emails. I searched for Derek's name. I filtered by date. Going back 3 weeks, there was a thread I had almost forgotten about. It was during the final technical review. We were scrubbing the data migration protocols. I found the email from Derek. The subject line was RE Security Compliance, Expedited Timeline. I opened it. His message was short, frantic. Olivia, we are lagging on the legacy data integration. If we run the full diagnostic on the encryption keys, we miss the deadline for the preliminary demo. Just bypass the tertiary check. Sign off on the risk acceptance. We can patch it post-launch. Elena does not need to know the sausage making. She just needs to eat. I remembered reading that email. I remembered the cold knot in my stomach. Bypassing the tertiary check wasn't just cutting a corner. It was leaving the back door of a bank vault open while telling the client it was locked. I scrolled down to my reply. Derek, I cannot sign off on that. It violates the compliance standards we promised in the RFP. If we launch with that vulnerability and they get breached, it is negligence. I will not put my name on a falsified security audit. There was no reply to that email. I sat there, the silence of the room deepening. That was it. That was the smoking gun. The issue wasn't the $5 latte. The latte was just the theater. A prop they grabbed because it was convenient and tangible. The real issue was Monday morning. Part of the signing packet for Monday included the final technical readiness certificate. It required the signature of the lead implementation liaison. It was a legal document stating that the system met all compliance standards outlined in the proposal. If I was still employed on Monday, I would have to sign that document, and I would have refused. I would have demanded the security checks be done properly, which would have delayed the launch, which would have exposed Derek's timeline as a lie. They didn't fire me because I spent $5. They fired me because I was the only person in the room who wouldn't lie for them. I was the check engine light that they couldn't turn off, so they smashed the bulb. My heart began to race, not with fear, but with the thrill of the hunt. I wasn't just a victim of petty office politics anymore. I was a witness to corporate fraud. I looked at the clock. It was 11 at night. If I stayed silent, if I let them spin the narrative, Derek would replace me with someone pliable, probably his nephew, or some junior associate who didn't know a firewall from a fire drill. That person would sign the readiness certificate on Monday blindly. Crestline would sign the deal, the system would launch, and 6 months from now, when the data breach happened, Biet would blame it on unforeseen external threats, and Crestline would be left cleaning up a disaster. I couldn't let that happen. Not because I owed BAT anything I owed them nothing but ash, but because my professional reputation was embedded in the architecture of that deal. Even if I wasn't there, I was the one who designed it. If it failed, my name would still be whispered in the wreckage. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to sue them, not yet. A lawsuit was slow, a lawsuit was messy, and a lawsuit was exactly what they expected. They expected me to call a lawyer and fight for a severance package. They were ready for a legal battle. They were not ready for a tactical nuclear strike on their credibility. I closed the laptop. I walked into my bedroom and laid out my clothes for the next morning. I chose a suit that was sharper than anything I wore to the office. I would call Elena Markham at 8 in the morning sharp. I would not call her as a friend. I would not call her as a beggar. I would call her as a professional obligation. I rehearsed the opening line in my head as I stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that I knew would be light and fitful. Elena, I am calling to inform you of a material change in the project resources that directly impacts your risk profile. It was not revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This was quality assurance. I was going to ensure that Crestline got exactly what they paid for the truth. And if the truth happened to dismantle Derek Voss's career and burn Briarline Advisory Technologies to the ground, well, that was just the cost of doing business. The silence in the apartment didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt like the deep breath before the plunge. I closed my eyes. Monday was coming. But first, I had to survive the weekend, and I had to make one phone call that would ring louder than any alarm bell they had ever heard. The sun hitting my kitchen table on Saturday morning was aggressively bright, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile light of the Beatty conference room less than 24 hours earlier. I sat with my phone in front of me, aligning it perfectly parallel to the edge of the table. I had a cup of coffee to my right, black, homemade, and costing me significantly less than $5. I watched the digital clock on the stove flip to 8 in the morning. In the corporate world, calling a client on a Saturday is usually a cardinal sin. It screams of desperation or a lack of boundaries. But this was not a sales call. This was a distress signal disguised as a courtesy. I unlocked the phone and dialed Elena Markham's mobile number. I knew she would be up. Elena ran 5 miles every morning at 6. By 8, she would be reviewing the week's logistics reports. She answered on the second ring. "Olivia," she said. Her voice was crisp, though I could hear the faint clatter of silverware in the background. She was likely having breakfast. "I assume you are calling to tell me legal has sent over the final DocuSign link. I told them I would review it on Monday. But if you need it done today, I can make an exception for you." I took a steady breath. I did not let my voice waver. I did not let any anger seep into the vowels. "Elena, I am afraid I'm calling with a different update," I said. "I wanted to reach out to you personally before you heard it through official channels on Monday. As of yesterday afternoon, I am no longer employed by Briarline Advisory Technologies." The silence on the other end was absolute. The sound of silverware stopped. "Repeat that," she said. Her tone had dropped the casual warmth. It was now flat and dangerous. "I have been terminated from my position at BAT." I said, "Effective immediately." "Terminated," she said the word as if it were a foreign language she could not quite parse. "We signed the largest contract in your firm's history in 48 hours. A contract, I might remind you, that is entirely predicated on your implementation strategy." "Did you quit?" "No." I said, "I was fired." "For what Elena demanded. Did you embezzle funds? Did you leak data?" "Olivia, I need to know if I have been sharing my roadmap with a criminal. I violated the expense policy," I said calmly. "Which policy?" "The one regarding unauthorized client gratuities." I said, "I purchased a latte for a client during a negotiation meeting without a pre-authorization form. The cost was $5.25. I waited. This was the moment. I needed her to do the math. I needed her to weigh the absurdity of the infraction against the magnitude of the deal. "You are telling me," Elena said, her voice quiet and incredulous, "that Derek Voss fired the architect of a $120 million deal over a coffee." "That is the official reason provided to me," I said. "I wanted you to know so that you are not blindsided when a new project lead contacts you on Monday. I want to ensure your transition is as smooth as possible. Even if I am not the one conducting it, there will be no transition." Elena said. I could hear the rustling of paper. She was moving. "I am looking at the draft contract right now. Section 8. Key personnel. They cannot swap you out without my written consent. Did they tell you who is replacing you?" I said. There was no handover discussion. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "They removed the linchpin 3 days before launch and do not even have a spare part ready. Thank you for calling me." "Olivia, you have been very professional. Do not speak to anyone else from my team yet." She hung up. I placed the phone back on the table. My hand was steady. I took a sip of my coffee. The first domino had fallen. Now, I had to wait for the chain reaction. I did not have to wait long. 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was not Elena. The caller ID displayed a name that made my pulse jump, though I kept my breathing even. Graham Sutter, Chief Operating Officer of Crestline Trust and Holdings. Elena was the operational muscle, but Graham was the executioner. He was the man who signed the checks and, more importantly, the man who decided which vendors lived or died. He was known for being emotionless, a man who viewed business as a series of binary equations. I answered, "Mr. Sutter." I said, "Ms. Ross." His voice was a deep baritone, devoid of pleasantries. Elena just got off the phone with me. She is quite agitated. I prefer to be informed. I want you to walk me through the events of yesterday afternoon. Chronologically. Leave nothing out. But keep your opinions to yourself. I want facts. Of course, I said. I sat up straighter in my chair, treating my kitchen like a boardroom. At 2 in the afternoon, I concluded the final roadmap meeting with Elena. I began. During the break, she requested a coffee. I purchased 2 lattes. I paid for mine personally. I charged hers to the corporate card. The cost was $5.25. At 2:30, after Elena departed, Derek Voss entered the conference room with the expense notification. He informed me that I had violated the pre-authorization policy for client entertainment. Go on, Graham said. He terminated my employment on the spot. I continued. He demanded my badge and laptop immediately. I was escorted out of the building by security within 15 minutes. Did he ask for a status report on the Crestline account? Graham asked. No. Did he ask you to transfer your login credentials for the implementation sandbox? No. Did he introduce you to a successor or ask for a briefing on the outstanding critical path items? Number Mr. Sutter. The conversation was entirely focused on the $5 expense. There was no mention of business continuity. There was a pause on the line. It lasted for a long time. I could hear Graham breathing, a slow, rhythmic intake of air. Ms. Ross, Graham said finally, I have been in this industry for 30 years. I have seen people fired for incompetence. I have seen them fired for theft. I have seen them fired for sleeping with the wrong person. But I have never seen a company decapitate itself over a rounding error. It was a strict interpretation of policy. I said, keeping my tone neutral. It is not policy, Graham corrected sharply. It is suicide. You do not fire your lead general on the eve of battle because she bought a soldier a drink. That is not discipline. That is panic. He was seeing it. He was seeing exactly what I needed him to see. If they are willing to jeopardize a 9-figure contract over $5, Graham continued, almost to himself, it implies one of 2 things. Either their management is criminally incompetent, or they needed you out of that room so badly that the money did not matter. And frankly, Ms. Ross, I do not like either option. If they are incompetent, they will crash my systems. If they are hiding something, they will compromise my data. I cannot speculate on their motives. I said, I can only speak to the events as they occurred. You do not need to speculate, Graham said. The facts speak loud enough. They fired you on a Friday afternoon without a transition plan. That means on Monday morning, when we are supposed to go live. No one at BAT will know where the bodies are buried. They just turned a calculated risk into a gamble, and Crestline does not gamble. I remained silent. I let him come to the conclusion on his own. We have a clause, Graham said. The continuity rider. I assume you are familiar with it, since you wrote it. I said. It gives us the right to pause all activity if key personnel are removed. He said, BAT thinks they removed a liability. They have no idea they just voided their own insurance policy. I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking on his end. He was typing furiously. Ms. Ross, I appreciate your candor, Graham said. You have conducted yourself with dignity, which is more than I can say for your former employer. I am freezing the contract signing. We are launching an immediate review of BAT's operational readiness. I understand. I said, one last thing, Graham said. His voice dropped, losing the inquisitive tone and taking on a conspiratorial edge. When a company makes a move this stupid, they usually realize it about 48 hours later. That brings us to Monday morning. What happens on Monday, I asked. Though I knew. Panic, Graham said coldly. We will notify them of the contract freeze within the hour. They will scramble. They will look for a scapegoat, and then they will look for a fix. You are the fix. Olivia. I gripped the phone tighter. They are going to call you, Graham said, very fast, and they are going to offer you things. Money. Your job back. Apologies. I do not want my job back. I said honestly. Good, Graham replied, because if you went back to them, I would lose respect for you. But answer the phone when they call. Let them talk. and record everything. Why, because, Graham said, and I could practically hear the shark-like grin through the receiver. I want to know exactly how much they think you are worth now that they know the price of their stupidity isn't $5. It is everything they have. The line clicked dead. I sat there in the morning sun, the silence returning to the kitchen. But it felt different now. It wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a trap waiting to snap shut. Graham Sutter had just handed me the weapon I needed. I wasn't just a fired employee anymore. I was the choke point. Beat had severed the connection, thinking they were cutting me loose. Instead, they had just realized that I was the only bridge between them and the future they were desperate to reach. And just as Graham predicted, the phone began to ring again. I looked at the screen. It was not Elena. It was not Graham. It was Melissa Ray from HR at BAT. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I didn't answer. Let them sweat. Let them stare at the empty chair where I used to sit, and realize that the most expensive thing in the office wasn't the server rack or the furniture. It was the person they had escorted out the door. The ringing stopped. A voicemail notification popped up. Then, a text message from Derek Voss. Olivia, pick up. We need to clarify a few things regarding the exit paperwork. I smiled. It had started. The silence in my apartment did not last long. By 10 in the morning, my phone had transformed from a communication device into a vibrating nuisance that refused to sit still on the kitchen table. It started with Melissa Ray. Melissa was the head of HR, a woman whose primary job description was protecting the company from lawsuits, not protecting employees from abuse. Her messages popped up in rapid succession, glowing green on the screen. Olivia, we have identified a procedural error in yesterday's exit processing. Please call me. We need to rectify this immediately. There is no need to involve external parties. We can fix this internally. I watched the messages stack up. Procedural error. That was the corporate euphemism for realizing they had just set their own house on fire. They were not calling because they missed me. They were calling because Graham Sutter had just dropped the guillotine on their biggest revenue stream, and they needed the head back on the body before the patient bled out. I did not reply. Then, the phone rang. It was a number I did not have saved, but the area code was local. I knew who it was. Derek Voss would never call from his office line now. That line was recorded. He was calling from his personal cell. I picked up. I did not say hello. I just listened. Olivia Derek's voice was tight, high-pitched. He sounded like a man who had just run up 10 flights of stairs. Hey, are you there? Look, we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. Derek, I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with his panic. Listen, yesterday it was intense, Derek said, rushing the words. Emotions were high. We were all under pressure for the Crestline close. I think we both said things we did not mean. I want you to come back in. Today. Right now. We can treat yesterday like a sick day. We will scrub the termination from your file, like it never happened. I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. Like it never happened, I repeated. You humiliated me in front of my team. You accused me of theft over $5. You had security escort me out of the building while my colleagues watched. It was a misunderstanding. Derek pleaded. I was stressed about the expense report audit. I overreacted. I am admitting that. Olivia, I am being the bigger man here. Come back, and we get back to work. Elena needs you for Monday. Elena does not need me. I said, Elena needs a partner she can trust, and you just proved that Beatty is not that partner. Don't make this about ego, Derek snapped, his nice guy veneer cracking instantly. You are good at your job, but you are not irreplaceable. I am offering you a lifeline. Take it. You told me yesterday that anyone could do my job. I said, you called me incompetent. You said I was reckless. Maybe I was wrong. Derek said, the word maybe hung in the air. A pathetic, half-hearted concession. We all make mistakes. I do not. I said, not with compliance. And not with my self-respect. I hung up. I blocked his number. 5 minutes later, my email inbox pinged. This time, it wasn't HR, and it wasn't Derek. The sender was Caleb Rourke, the CEO of Briarline Advisory Technologies. Caleb was a man who lived in the penthouse office and only descended to the operational floor for photo opportunities. He had never sent me a direct email in 7 years. The subject line read, "Resolution." I opened it. "Olivia, I have been informed of the situation regarding your departure. I believe the actions taken were precipitous and do not reflect the value you bring to this organization. We are prepared to offer you a revised compensation package, effective immediately, along with a signing bonus of $20,000. To resume your duties as lead liaison for the Crestline account. Name your terms. Let us get this contract signed on Monday." Caleb, it was transactional. Cold. There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement of the toxicity Derek had cultivated. It was just a bribe. He was trying to buy my compliance because he knew the price of losing Crestline was infinitely higher than $20,000. I hit reply. I didn't type a number. I didn't ask for a raise. I typed a single question. "Mr. Rourke, how long have you known that Derek Voss forces his team to bypass security protocols to meet artificial deadlines?" I sent it. I waited. The phone did not ring. The email did not ping back. The silence from Caleb Rourke was deafening. He wasn't going to answer that. Answering that would create a paper trail of negligence. By staying silent, he confirmed everything I suspected. He knew, or worse, he didn't care, as long as the revenue graph went up. The phone rang again. It was Melissa from HR. I decided to answer this one. I needed to know what their next move was. "Ms. Ross," Melissa said, her voice dropping the fake sweetness she had used in her texts. "We are aware that you have been in contact with Elena Markham and Graham Sutter. They contacted me. I said, they had questions about the project status. You are bound by a non-disclosure agreement," Melissa said. Her tone was sharp, brittle, and a non-solicitation clause. "Any attempt to disparage the company or solicit business from our clients is a breach of contract. We will pursue legal action if you continue to interfere with the Crestline deal." "Interfere?" I asked. "I simply told them I was no longer employed. Is that a state secret?" Melissa: "You are walking a very fine line." Olivia: She warned, "We are offering you a chance to return. If you refuse, and if you sabotage this contract, we will bury you in litigation. You won't work in this industry again. Are you threatening me? I am advising you." She said, "Don't talk to Crestline again. Direct all their inquiries to Derek. Derek fired me." I said, "I don't answer to Derek. And as of yesterday, I don't answer to you. If you want to talk to me, you can speak to my lawyer." I ended the call. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. They were scared. They were terrified. They were throwing everything at the wall: bribery, gaslighting, threats hoping something would stick. I went to my laptop and searched for a labor attorney. I found a firm that specialized in wrongful termination and whistleblower protection. I drafted an email, attaching the logs of the calls, the text messages from Derek, and the email from Caleb. I wanted everything on the record. I was about to close my laptop when a notification popped up on my personal messaging app. It was a secure message from a number I didn't recognize, but the profile picture was a generic landscape. "Hey, it's Tanya, from accounting. Tanya Brooks." She sat 3 rows over from me. We had eaten lunch together maybe 5 times in 3 years. She was quiet, diligent, and invisible, the kind of person who saw everything because nobody thought she was watching. "I shouldn't be messaging you," the text read, "but I heard what happened. Derek is telling everyone you stole from the company. It's disgusting. It's fine." "Tanya," I typed back, "I am handling it." "No, you don't understand," she replied. The 3 dots of her typing bubble pulsed for a long time, as if she was hesitating. "I processed the expense reports. I saw the flag on your $5 latte. And it didn't get flagged by the automated system. Olivia, the system ignores anything under $20. It was manually flagged by Derek." I stared at the screen. I knew that. Derek wanted me gone. "But that is not the weird part," Tanya continued. "I looked at the daily ledger for Friday to see why he was digging into petty cash. He wasn't digging, he was burying. What do you mean? I asked. There is another entry on Friday. Tanya wrote, a massive consultation fee paid to a shell vendor we have never used before, $30,000. It was authorized by Derek at 10 in the morning. He flagged your $5 coffee at 2 in the afternoon to create a noise distraction for compliance. If compliance is busy investigating an ethics violation for client entertainment, they aren't looking at the vendor approval queue. My breath hitched. The $5 wasn't just a convenient excuse to fire me, it was a smokescreen. Derek had embezzled or misallocated $30,000 on the same day, and he needed a sacrificial lamb to clog up the audit logs. He threw me to the wolves to hide his own theft. Do you have proof? I typed. I have screenshots, Tanya replied. But if I send them, I lose my job. Don't send them yet. I wrote back, just keep them safe. And Tanya, thank you. I put the phone down. The game had just changed. This wasn't just about a botched contract or a bad manager anymore. I wasn't just fighting for my reputation. I was holding the thread of a criminal conspiracy. And on Monday, I wasn't just going to pull it. I was going to yank it until the whole tapestry unraveled. Tanya Brooks chose a diner 3 towns over from the Beatty headquarters. It was the kind of place that smelled of old grease and lemon cleaner, where the booths were high-backed vinyl, and the waitresses didn't care who you were as long as you ordered something. It was perfect. No one from the polished, glass-walled world of Briarline Advisory Technologies would ever be caught dead here. I arrived 10 minutes early, but Tanya was already there. She was sitting in the back corner, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her eyes darting toward the door every time it opened. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She just nodded and moved her purse off the seat opposite her. You look tired, she said as I sat down. I have had a long 24 hours, I replied. Thanks for meeting me. Tanya, you know you are taking a risk. I know, she said. She leaned in, lowering her voice until it was barely audible over the clatter of the kitchen. But I cannot sit on this. Olivia, I have been in accounting for 15 years. I know the difference between sloppy bookkeeping and engineered chaos. What is happening at BAT right now? It is engineered. Tell me about the $30,000. I said. Tanya took a sip of her tea, her hand trembling slightly. It is not just one payment. That is just the one that happened on Friday. BAT is bleeding cash. Olivia, the burn rate is insane. We are spending money on office renovations, marketing galas, and executive retreats, but we are stretching vendor payments to 90 days. The only reason the lights are still on is because Caleb and the board are in the middle of a Series C funding round. I knew they were fundraising. I said, that is standard. It is not standard when the entire valuation is based on a lie, Tanya countered. They are pitching the investors on the Crestline pipeline. They are projecting revenue from your deal as if it is already in the bank. They are using the projected $120 million to leverage loans to cover payroll. I sat back, the plastic of the booth sticking to my coat. It made sense. The desperation, the pressure, the frantic need to sign on Monday. They weren't just closing a deal. They were saving the company from insolvency. Here's the thing about the $5, Tanya continued, her voice gaining a little more strength. We have this unwritten rule in finance. Caleb calls it visible austerity. We are instructed to audit the hell out of the small stuff. Lattes, cab fares, office supplies. If an employee spends $10 on pens, we need 3 signatures. It creates a paper trail that looks like we are incredibly disciplined. When the auditors come, we show them these stacks of rejected expense reports for trivial amounts. We say, look how tight our ship is. We do not waste a penny. It is theater. I realized, exactly, Tanya said. It is performance art for the investors. But while we are screaming about a $5 coffee, the invoices for consulting fees and strategic advisory services payments of $20,000, $50,000, even $80,000, they bypass the queue entirely. They go straight to the CFO's desk and get approved with a rubber stamp. No questions asked. So Derek flagging my coffee wasn't just him being a jerk. I said, He was creating a data point, Tanya said. He needed a rejection in the system on Friday to balance out the approval of that $30,000 payment to the shell company. You were the sacrifice to the god of compliance. He made an example of you to prove the system works, while he was simultaneously breaking it. I felt a cold anger settling in my stomach. It wasn't the hot flash of rage I had felt in the conference room. This was colder, heavier. I remembered the email from 3 weeks ago, Derek pushing me to sign off on the security bypass. He needed the deal signed, I said, thinking aloud. But he knew I wouldn't sign the technical readiness certificate if the encryption wasn't up to standard. If I didn't sign, the deal would stall. If the deal stalled, the funding round would collapse. So he had to get rid of you, Tanya said. But who signs on Monday, I asked. If I am gone, who puts their name on the compliance document? You need a certified lead liaison. Tanya looked down at her tea. That is the other thing I found. They put a new name into the payroll system on Thursday, a day before they fired you. I froze. Who Jason Voss? Tanya said. The name hung in the air between us. Voss, I repeated. Derek's brother-cousin, I think, Tanya said. He has been listed as an external consultant for 3 months, but he has never billed a single hour. Suddenly, on Thursday, his status changed to full-time employee. Title, Senior Implementation Lead. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Jason Voss, the guy who used to sell solar panels in Austin, I met him at a Christmas party 2 years ago. He doesn't know what an API is. He thinks the cloud is actual weather. He does not need to know what an API is, Tanya said quietly. He just needs to know how to hold a pen. Derek is bringing him in because he will sign whatever piece of paper Derek puts in front of him. He is the rubber stamp. The puzzle pieces slammed together. The picture they formed was grotesque. They hadn't fired me because I was a liability. They fired me because I was an obstacle. I was the safety switch on the nuclear weapon, and they needed to launch. So they stripped the switch out and replaced it with a piece of wire that would short-circuit on command. They are going to let him sign off on the Crestline data migration, I said, horrified. He will approve the bypass. They will launch the system with a security hole the size of Texas just to get the investors to wire the money. And when the breach happens, Tanya said, Crestline's data will be all over the dark web, and BAT will already have their cash. This isn't just bad management, I said. This is fraud. They are defrauding the investors, and they are setting Crestline up for a catastrophe. That is why I am telling you, Tanya said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive. She slid it across the table. I cannot be the whistleblower. Olivia, I have kids. I have a mortgage. If they find out I pulled these logs, they will ruin me. But you are already out. I looked at the drive. It was small, black, and unassuming. What is on this? I asked. The expense logs from Friday, she said. The timestamp of when Derek flagged your coffee, the timestamp of when he approved the $30,000 payment, and the payroll entry for Jason Voss dated 24 hours before your termination. I covered the drive with my hand. Thank you. Tanya, be careful, she said. Standing up, these people are desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. She walked out of the diner without looking back. I sat there for another 20 minutes, just turning the USB drive over in my fingers. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. I was focused. I left the diner and drove straight to the office of the labor attorney I had contacted earlier. His name was Robert Vance. Robert Vance was a man who wore suits that cost more than my car and had a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was perfect. I sat in his office, surrounded by walls of leather-bound books that were probably just for show, and I laid it all out. I didn't tell him the emotional version. I told him the structural version, the funding round, the compliance bypass, the nepotism, the scapegoating. I handed him the USB drive. I also forwarded him the email chain where Derek had tried to pressure me into signing the risk acceptance. Robert Vance listened in silence. He took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he picked up the printout of Derek's email, the one where he explicitly asked me to ignore the security protocols to meet the deadline. Robert adjusted his glasses. He looked at the paper, then at me. You know, he said, his voice measured and deep. Usually, when people come to me with wrongful termination suits, it is a he said, she said situation. It is about personality clashes or vague performance reviews. It is messy. He tapped the email with his index finger. But this he said. This is not a labor dispute. Ms. Ross, if they fired you because you refused to sign a fraudulent compliance document, and then they replaced you with an unqualified relative to force that document through, that moves us out of the realm of HR complaints. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. This is corporate malfeasance. This is a violation of fiduciary duty to their shareholders. And if Crestline is a publicly traded entity or deals with regulated data, this is a federal crime. He looked at the USB drive. You came here wanting to know if you could get a severance package. Robert said, I am telling you that we are not asking for a severance package. We are going to draft a letter of preservation. We are going to demand that they do not delete a single byte of data from their servers, because when this breaks, they are going to try to wipe the drives. I don't want to destroy the company. I said, I just want to make sure Crestline doesn't get hurt. You do not have to destroy them. Olivia, Robert said, closing the file. They have already destroyed themselves. You are just the one turning on the light so everyone can see the wreckage. He stood up and offered me his hand. Go home. Do not answer their calls. Let me handle the communication from here on out. By Monday morning, Briarline Advisory Technologies is going to wish they had just let you buy that latte. I walked out of his office and into the afternoon heat. The city looked the same, but the world felt different. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the witness for the prosecution, and Monday was coming fast. Robert Vance leaned back in his leather chair, the late afternoon sun highlighting the dust motes dancing in his office. He held a pen in his hand, tapping it rhythmically against the armrest. There is a very distinct line. Olivia, he said, his voice low and practiced, between corporate espionage and institutional memory. You need to walk that line as if it were a razor blade. I understand. I said, do not access their servers, he instructed. Do not download their client lists. Do not touch their proprietary code. If you have a single document in your possession that is marked confidential, delete it. Right now. We are not going to win this by playing dirty. We are going to win because everything you need to destroy them is already in your head. They are going to say I am stealing their strategy. I noted. Let them say it, Vance replied with a thin smile. You cannot steal your own experience. You cannot steal your own professional judgment. If Crestline asks you a question and you answer it based on your expertise, that is not theft. That is consulting. Now, send the email. I nodded. I opened my laptop right there on his mahogany desk. I drafted the message to Graham Sutter and Elena Markham. It was short. It was surgical. Dear Graham and Elena, regarding your inquiries about the implementation status, I am willing to assist in clarifying any transitional gaps to ensure the stability of your project. However, please note that I will strictly adhere to the confidentiality agreements held with my former employer. I will not discuss BAT's internal proprietary data. I will only speak to the technical architecture I personally designed and the operational risks visible from an external perspective. Best regards, Olivia. I hit send. Now, Vance said, checking his watch. We wait. We did not wait long. 11 minutes later, Graham Sutter replied, meet us at the Capitol Grill in Uptown. 1 hour. Private dining room. Come alone. I looked at Vance. He nodded. Go. Listen more than you speak, and sign nothing until I see it. The restaurant was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of dry-aged steak and expensive scotch. Graham and Elena were already seated in a small, enclosed room at the back. There was no food on the table, only a pitcher of water and a folder. I sat down. Let us cut the preamble, Graham said. He looked tired. The circles under his eyes were darker than they had been on the phone. We have spent the last 6 hours trying to get a straight answer out of BAT. It has been like talking to a wall of fog. They cannot tell us who is leading the data migration. They cannot produce a risk mitigation log. They cannot even tell us where the encryption keys are stored. That is because I was the only one who had them. I said, and I handed them over to IT security before I walked out, which means they are locked in a vault that no one knows the combination to. Elena added, shaking her head. It is a disaster. Olivia, a complete, unmitigated disaster. Graham pushed the folder toward me. We are not here to talk about Beatty, Graham said. We are here to talk about us. We have a $120 million initiative that is about to drive off a cliff. We need a driver. I opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a contract. It was a term sheet. Position head of technical partnerships. Reporting to Graham Sutter. COO. Company Crestline Trust and Holdings. I looked up. You want to hire me? We want to acquire you. Graham corrected. We are cutting out the middleman. We realized yesterday that we were not buying Beat's software. We were buying your brain. The software is useless without the implementation strategy. So, we want you to come in-house. You will sit on our side of the table. You will manage the vendors. You will manage the integration. And effectively, you will manage BAT. I stared at the paper. It was a brilliant move. If I worked for Crestline, I wouldn't be breaking my non-compete because I wouldn't be working for a competitor. I would be working for the client. I would be the boss of the people who just fired me. I have conditions. I said. Graham leaned back. I expected nothing less. First, I said, my voice steady, I need absolute transparency on my role. I am not just a project manager. I need veto power on all compliance risks. If I say a protocol is unsafe, we stop. No debates, no overriding me for deadlines. Agreed, Elena said immediately. Second, I continued, I cannot do this alone. If I am going to police Beatty, I need a team. I want a budget for 3 senior hires. Engineers of my choosing. People who actually know how to read code. Not just people who know how to send invoices. Done, Graham said. What is the third? The third is protection. I said, Beat is going to come after me. They are going to say I poached the business. They are going to say I am difficult. They are going to sue me. Let them sue, Graham said, his voice dropping to a growl. We have a legal department that eats firms like Beatty for breakfast. We will indemnify you. If they sue you for doing your job, we will bury them in countersuits until their grandchildren are paying legal fees. I took a pen from my purse. I circled the 3 conditions on the paper. Then we have a deal. I said, by the time I left the restaurant, the sun had set. I checked my phone. The rumor mill was already spinning. I had texts from 2 former colleagues at Beatty people I thought were friends, asking if it was true that I had demanded a 50% raise and stormed out when I didn't get it. Derek is telling everyone you went rogue. One text read, he says you were trying to blackmail the company. I didn't reply. It was the standard playbook. When you cannot attack the message, you attack the messenger. Derek was trying to paint me as unstable so that when Crestline asked about me, he could say, oh, she was a nightmare. You are better off without her. He didn't know I was already sitting at the table. On Sunday morning, the war moved from the shadows into the light. Elena sent an official request to BAT. She didn't mention me. She simply referenced the contract. Per Section 8.4, we require the curriculum vitae of the new primary implementation liaison. Additionally, we require a comprehensive 90-day transition plan, signed by the outgoing liaison, detailing the transfer of all cryptographic assets and compliance protocols. It was a trap. Elena knew there was no transition plan. She knew I hadn't signed anything. She was forcing them to admit they had nothing. BAT's response came 2 hours later. Elena forwarded it to me. Dear Ms. Markham, we are pleased to announce that Jason Voss will be stepping in as the senior lead. Jason brings a wealth of experience to the role. Regarding the transition plan, we are expediting the process internally. We assure you that there will be no disruption to service. A wealth of experience. I read aloud to myself in my living room. Jason Voss, whose last job was managing a regional sales team for solar panels. I called Elena. They are lying. I said, Jason cannot run this. He doesn't have the clearance levels. I know. Elena said, but look at the second attachment. I opened the second file in the email. It was a formal memo from Caleb Rourke, the CEO, intended to reassure the client. I read the paragraph Elena had highlighted in yellow. While we regret the departure of Ms. Ross, we want to clarify that her role was primarily administrative support and client coordination. She was not the technical architect of the system, and therefore her exit does not trigger the material adverse change clause in our agreement. The core engineering was handled by our senior development team, who remained fully engaged. My blood ran cold, then hot. They had just walked right into it. "Do you see it?" Elena asked, her voice tight with satisfaction. "They just called me administrative support." I said, "They did." Elena said, "To save face, to pretend you weren't important so they wouldn't violate the key personnel clause. They are trying to convince us that firing you doesn't matter because you were just a secretary with a fancy title." "But I have the emails." I said, "I have the commits in the code repository. I have the strategy documents with my name on the cover page." "Exactly," Elena said. "But more importantly, Olivia, look at the date on the original proposal BAT sent us 6 months ago, the one we based the decision on." I closed my eyes, recalling the document. "It lists me as the lead enterprise architect." "Correct," Elena said. "So, here's the situation. Either they lied to us 6 months ago when they said you were the architect to get us to sign the deal, or they are lying to us now when they say you were just support to keep us from canceling the deal." I sat back on my couch. It was perfect. It was a logical paradox they could not escape. "If I was the architect," I said, "then firing me triggers the clause and you can cancel. If I was not the architect, then they committed fraud during the bidding process by misrepresenting the team. They just signed a confession." Elena said, "They tried to minimize you to save the contract, and in doing so, they just gave us the legal grounds to dismantle the entire relationship." I looked at the screen, at the words, "administrative support." It was the final insult. They wanted to erase my work. They wanted to pretend 7 years of building their infrastructure was nothing more than scheduling meetings and buying coffee. "Elena," I said, "when is the meeting with them tomorrow, 9 in the morning?" She said, "Hybrid. They will be in their conference room. We will be on the screen. I will be ready." I said, "Good," Elena replied, "because I am not just going to cancel the contract. Olivia, I am going to let you do it." I hung up the phone. The fear was gone. The anxiety was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard certainty of mathematics. They had tried to balance the equation by subtracting me. They were about to learn that I was the only variable that made the whole thing work. I walked to my closet and pulled out my best suit, the navy blue one, the one I wore when I closed the deal. Tomorrow. I wasn't going back to BAT as an employee. I was going back as the reckoning. Monday morning did not begin with a bang. It began with the quiet, suffocating sound of a vacuum sealing shut. I was sitting in my living room, which had effectively become the war room for the Crestline acquisition of my own intellectual property. My laptop was open to a secure channel Graham Sutter had set up for me. On the screen, the status of the BAT contract changed from pending signature to administrative hold. It was a small color change from amber to gray, but in the world of high-finance enterprise software, it was the equivalent of a flatline on an EKG monitor. Crestline had officially paused the deal. They didn't cancel it yet. They simply sent a notification to Caleb Rourke stating that due to material inconsistencies in personnel data, they were initiating a third-party capability audit. An audit is not a meeting. An audit is an invasion. It means external forensic accountants and technical surveyors come into your house, open your drawers, and look for the skeletons. The fallout was immediate. At 10 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was not BAT. It was a contact of mine at a logistics firm in Chicago. Another one of BAT's mid-tier clients. "Olivia." The message read, "Quick question. I just saw a LinkedIn notification that you left BAT. We have a quarterly review on Thursday. Is Derek taking over?" Because I just called his desk and got a busy signal for an hour. I didn't reply. I forwarded the screenshot to Robert Vance. "It is starting." I whispered to myself. The logistics firm wasn't big, but they talked. And in an industry this incestuous, Doubt is a contagion. If Crestline the whale was hesitant, the minnows would start to panic. Bat had spent years projecting an image of invincibility. Now, a single loose thread was threatening to unravel the whole sweater. Tanya Brooks messaged me at noon. "It is chaos in here," she wrote. "Caleb is screaming at legal, but that is not the worst part. The investors just called." I leaned in. The investors were the lifeblood. "They want to see the compliance binder," Tanya continued. "Specifically, the ISO certification documents for the new encryption module. They said if the Crestline deal is delayed, they need proof that the tech is actually ready so they don't pull the bridge loan." I smiled. It was a grim, humorless smile. The compliance binder was a myth. It was a collection of aspirations and half-finished code. The only thing that would have made it real was the risk acceptance form that Derek had tried to force me to sign 3 weeks ago, the form I refused, without my signature, or the signature of a qualified lead. That binder was just a stack of paper, and now, they had Jason Voss. If Jason signed it today, the timestamp would show he signed it after the investors asked for it, which looked like retroactive fabrication. If they tried to backdate it, they would be committing fraud. They were trapped in a timeline of their own making. But then, I found something that turned my amusement into cold fury. I was digging through the Internet Archive, looking at cached versions of BAT's marketing deck from last week, the deck they used to pitch the Series C funding. I wanted to see how they positioned the team. I found slide 14. There, in high definition, was my headshot. Underneath it, the text read, "Olivia Ross, lead architect, with over 15 years of specialized experience. Ms. Ross guarantees the structural integrity of our proprietary implementation protocols." My hands shook as I took a screenshot. Yesterday, in an email to Crestline, they had called me administrative support to avoid a breach of contract. But to the investors, I was the guarantor of structural integrity. They were selling me as the genius to get the money, and dismissing me as the secretary to save the contract. I called Robert Vance immediately. "They are using my likeness and professional reputation to solicit capital while simultaneously disparaging my role to a client," I said, my voice vibrating with anger. "Send me the slide," Vance said, his voice calm and lethal. "And send me the email where they called you support." Sent. "Okay, Olivia, we are done playing defense," Vance said. "I am issuing a legal hold notice to BAT's general counsel within the hour. It demands the preservation of all data, emails, Slack logs, and marketing materials. It warns them that any deletion of files from this moment forward will be considered spoliation of evidence in pending litigation." "What will that do?" I asked. "It paralyzes them," Vance explained. "It cannot wipe the servers to hide Derek's embezzlement. Marketing cannot scrub your name from the deck without leaving a digital footprint of the deletion. We are freezing the crime scene." The legal hold went out at 1 o'clock. At 2 o'clock, the anonymous tip came in. It arrived in my personal email. From a Proton Mail account. No name, no subject line, just a block of text and a snippet of server code. I recognized the coding style immediately. It was from someone in the DevOps team at BAT. Someone who had a conscience but couldn't afford to lose their health insurance. They forced a config change at 4 a.m. on Saturday. The email read, "Jason didn't know how to do it, so Derek made a junior dev hardcode the bypass. They disabled the SSL handshake for the legacy data import to speed up the transfer speed by 40%. They are trying to rush the data into the Crestline sandbox before the audit starts, so it looks like the work is done." I stared at the code snippet. SSL verify mode equals none. My stomach dropped. They had turned off the security verification for the data transfer. They were moving sensitive financial records, Crestline's data, over an unsecured connection just to meet a deadline that didn't even exist anymore. It was like driving a bank truck with the back doors wide open because you wanted to save 5 minutes on the route. If a hacker sniffed that traffic, they wouldn't just steal the data. They would have the keys to the entire Crestline kingdom. This wasn't corporate politics anymore. This was negligence bordering on criminal endangerment. I had a choice. I could let them do it. I could let them crash and burn. If they got hacked, Bat would be sued into oblivion. It would be the ultimate revenge. But I couldn't do it. I thought of Elena. I thought of Graham. I thought of the innocent people whose data was in those files. I picked up the phone and called Graham Sutter. "You need to shut down the port," I said, skipping the hello. Olivia Graham asked, "What is going on? I am speaking to you now as an external consultant under our verbal agreement." I said, my voice sharp and professional. "I have received credible intelligence that BAT has disabled the SSL verification on the incoming data stream to your sandbox environment. They are trying to rush the migration to prove they are ready." "They turned off the encryption?" Graham asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "To increase speed." I said, "Cut the connection. Graham, right now. If that data is moving, it is naked." "Jesus," Graham hissed. I heard him shouting orders to someone in the room with him. "Kill the pipe, sever the connection to BAT immediately." There was a tense silence on the line for 30 seconds. Then, Graham came back. "We cut it," he said, breathing hard. "We caught them mid-transfer." "Olivia, if you are right about this, I am right." I said, "Run a packet analysis on the last gigabyte of data they sent. You will see the headers were stripped. I am initiating a forensic investigation." Graham said, his voice cold as ice. "Not just an audit, an investigation. We are going to find out who authorized this." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of waiting. The sun dipped low over the Dallas skyline, casting long shadows across my apartment. I felt drained. I had stopped a disaster, but I knew the backlash was coming. At 6 p.m, Elena called me on a video link. She looked exhausted. Graham was standing behind her, his arms crossed, looking like a statue of judgment. "We found it," Elena said. "The disabled encryption?" I asked. "Yes," Graham interjected. "But that is not the twist. Olivia, we asked them for the authorization. We asked BAT, who signed off on a change request that violates every security standard in the industry. And they sent us a document." Elena said. She pulled up a PDF on the shared screen. "It is a Global Optimization Protocol authorization." I squinted at the screen. The document looked standard. It was a request to optimize data flow, and at the bottom of the page, there was a signature. My signature. I felt the room spin. I never signed that. I refused to sign that. That is why they fired me. "Look at the date," Elena said, pointing to the corner. The date next to my signature was from 8 months ago. "I remember this," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. This was for a test, a localized test in a closed circuit, a sandbox environment with dummy data. "I authorized a speed test on a non-production server last year." "Exactly," Graham said. "They took a signature page from a safe, year-old test authorization, attached it to this new, reckless production change, and sent it to us as proof that you approved the security bypass before you left." My mouth went dry. They weren't just trying to hide their incompetence. They were framing me. Derek knew the audit would find the security hole. He knew he couldn't blame Jason because Jason hadn't been there long enough. So he dug into the archives, found a document where I approved a speed optimization, and weaponized it. If Crestline's data had been breached, BAT would have pulled out this document and said, "Look, Olivia Ross authorized the bypass. She was reckless. That is why we had to fire her." They were going to pin the destruction of a $120 million client on me to save their own skins. They just crossed the line from civil liability to forgery, Robert Vance said when I conferenced him in. His voice was no longer smooth. It was jagged. "They tried to frame me," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "For a data breach they were actively causing. They made a fatal error," Elena said, her eyes hard. "They forgot that we have the metadata. We can see that this PDF was stitched together 2 hours ago. We can see the digital artifacts where they cut and pasted your signature." Graham leaned into the camera. "Olivia, tomorrow morning is the final showdown. They think they have covered their tracks. They think this document saves them. I want you to be the one to tell them it doesn't. I will be there." I said, "No," Graham said. "You won't just be there. I am granting you temporary executive privileges on our system. When we get on that call, I don't want you to just argue with them." He paused. a cruel smile touching his lips. I want you to be the one who officially rejects their credentials. I looked at the screen, at the forged signature that was meant to be my tombstone. With pleasure. I said, the $5 latte was a distant memory. This was no longer about pettiness. They had tried to steal my name, my reputation, and my integrity to cover up a crime. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to dismantle an empire. I was going to expose a counterfeiting ring, and I had the real receipts. The courier arrived at Robert Vance's office at 9 a.m. on Tuesday. He carried a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with the red wax of high-end intimidation. Inside was a cease and desist order, followed by a notice of intent to sue from Briarline Advisory Technologies. I sat in the leather guest chair, reading the document. The language was violent. They accused me of tortious interference, misappropriation of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty, and solicitation of key clients. They claimed my conversation with Graham Sutter was a calculated attempt to sabotage their revenue stream. They demanded I cease all communication with Crestline immediately and return all stolen data or face damages in excess of $10 million. Robert Vance did not look impressed. He was eating a bagel. It is a lot of adjectives, Vance said, wiping a crumb from his lip. And very few nouns. They are accusing you of stealing the client, but the law distinguishes between stealing a client and the client running away screaming. They are trying to scare me into silence, I said, placing the document on the desk. They know about the audit. They know about the forged signature. This is their way of saying that if I talk, they will bankrupt me. It is a standard bully tactic, Vance agreed. They want to bury you in Discovery for 3 years, but they have a problem. Discovery works both ways. If they sue us, we get to depose Derek Voss under oath. We get to subpoena their server logs. They are bluffing. Olivia, they cannot afford a lawsuit because a lawsuit makes everything public, and right now, their survival depends on secrecy. He pulled his laptop closer. I will draft the response, he said. It will be 1 page. We will state that you have not solicited anyone. We will state that Crestline initiated contact pursuant to the key personnel clause, a clause Beatty wrote, and we will remind them that truth is an absolute defense against defamation. By noon, the atmosphere shifted again. My phone pinged with a notification from the Crestline internal server, where Graham had granted me guest access. It was a memo from Graham Sutter to the Crestline Board of Directors, copied to Beat's legal team. Subject: independent risk assessment. Please be advised that all communications between Crestline Trust and Ms. Olivia Ross have been initiated solely by Crestline executive leadership for the purpose of risk mitigation. Ms. Ross has acted at our specific request to verify historical compliance data. Any attempt by BAT to impede this verification process will be viewed as a material breach of the cooperation terms in our Master Services Agreement. I smiled. Graham had just stepped in front of the bullet. He stripped BAT of their argument. I wasn't a rogue employee stealing business. I was a consultant acting under the direct instruction of the client. BAT couldn't sue me without effectively suing their own customer. The walls at Beatty were beginning to crack. Tanya Brooks messaged me later that afternoon using an encrypted signal app. Derek is gone, she wrote. I stared at the screen. Fired, suspended. Tanya replied, pending an internal investigation. They escorted him out an hour ago. He was screaming in the hallway. He kept shouting that he was being set up, that you left the files in a mess on purpose to make him look bad. Who is running the account, I asked. No one, Tanya wrote. Jason Voss is hiding in his office. He is terrified. But Olivia, there is something else. I kept digging into the vendor payments. I waited, my thumb hovering over the screen. Those $30,000 consulting fees I told you about, Tanya continued. I cross-referenced the dates. Every time we paid one of those shell companies, it was exactly 2 days before a major meeting with the Series C investors, and the companies they are registered to addresses that correspond to advisory firms owned by friends of our CFO. My stomach churned. It wasn't just embezzlement. It looked like kickbacks. They were paying people to broker introductions, or perhaps even to falsify due diligence reports for the investors. Tanya, I typed back slowly. Do not send me those files. Do not send them to anyone. If this is financial fraud involving venture capital, this is SEC territory. I know, she replied. I am scared. Olivia, you have a choice. I wrote, you can stay quiet and hope it blows over. But if the ship sinks, they will blame accounting. Or you can go to the SEC whistleblower portal. It is anonymous. You get protection. I cannot tell you what to do. But if I were you, I would want to be the one holding the life raft, not the one handcuffed to the railing. I put the phone down. I wasn't going to leak this to the press. I wasn't going to post it on social media. That was the amateur move. If I went public, they could claim I was a disgruntled employee spreading conspiracy theories. But if Tanya went to the regulators, it was a federal investigation. I forwarded the conversation log to Vance. Just for the file, I told him, in case anything happens to her. By 4 p.m, the bleeding started. I received an email from the VP of Logistics at the Chicago firm, the one who had messaged me earlier. Olivia, just wanted to let you know. We saw the news about the Crestline audit. We are pausing our pilot program with BAT effective immediately. We cannot risk a compliance issue during our busy season. Good luck with whatever you are doing next. It was the domino effect. In enterprise software, trust is binary. You either have it or you don't. BAT had lost it. The Chicago firm was small, maybe a $50,000 account, but they talked to others. The silence from BAT's headquarters was being filled by the noise of clients rushing for the exits. Then came the call I had been waiting for. It was 6 p.m. The sun was setting, casting a bruised purple light over the city. My phone rang. It was Caleb Rourke. I looked at the name flashing on the screen. The CEO. The man who had ignored my email asking about Derek's ethics. The man who had signed off on the press release calling me administrative support. I gestured to Vance, who was sitting across from me in my living room, reviewing the forged signature evidence. He nodded and started the recording app on his tablet. I put the phone on speaker. Mr. Rourke, I said. My voice was neutral. Olivia, Caleb said. His voice was warm, paternal. The kind of voice he used at the company Christmas party when he gave speeches about family. I'm glad you picked up. I think things have gotten a little out of hand. Don't you? I think out of hand is an understatement. Caleb, I said. Your legal team sent me a threat to sue this morning. Lawyers, Caleb sighed, as if he had no control over the people he paid $500 an hour. They are pit bulls. You know how it is. They overreact. That is why I'm calling. I want to stop this. I want to find a solution that works for everyone. I am listening, I said. We want you back. Olivia, Caleb said. Not under Derek. Derek is taking a leave of absence. We want you to come back and run the implementation. We will match whatever Crestline is offering. We will give you a seat on the strategy committee. We just need to get this deal signed. You want me to come back to a company that forged my signature on a security authorization? I asked. There was a pause, a hesitation. That was a clerical error, Caleb said quickly. Jason pulled the wrong file. We are correcting it. It was not an error. Caleb, it was fraud. Olivia, look. Caleb's voice dropped, becoming more intimate, more conspiratorial. We are under a lot of pressure here. The funding round is contingent on Monday. We needed to show a clean chain of custody. We made some calls on the fly. And firing me? I asked. Was that a call on the fly? Or was that planned? It wasn't personal, Caleb said. And then he said the words that would hang him. We had the auditors coming in for the Series C. We needed a clean slate on the personnel costs. We needed to show we could cut overhead. The $5 expense, it was just a convenient tag. We needed a reason to clear the deck so we could present a leaner org chart to the investors. We intended to hire you back as a consultant eventually, once the funding cleared. I looked at Vance. His eyes were wide. He pointed frantically at the recording device. So, I said, keeping my voice steady, forcing my heart to slow down. You are telling me that the termination for cause the accusation of theft over a coffee was a fabrication. You did it to manipulate the headcount metrics for the investors. We did it to save the company, Caleb said. sounding defensive now. To save everyone's jobs, we needed the numbers to look right for the weekend. Olivia, be reasonable. Come back. We will pay you a $50,000 signing bonus. We will tear up the non-compete. Just call Graham Sutter and tell him the security concerns were a misunderstanding. You want me to lie to the client, I said. I want you to help us close the deal, Caleb corrected. We are a team. We protect each other. You didn't protect me on Friday, Caleb, I said. You threw me out like garbage because you thought I was the weak link. I am apologizing, Caleb said. I am offering you a lot of money. I don't want your money, I said, and I don't want my job back. Then what do you want? Caleb demanded, his patience snapping. You want to burn it down, is that it? You think you can take on a corporation like this? I am not burning anything down, Caleb, I said. I am just turning on the lights. I hung up. The room was silent for a long moment. Vance stopped the recording. He saved the file. Then he backed it up to the cloud. Then he emailed it to himself. He just admitted to pretextual termination, Vance said, letting out a long breath. And he admitted to manipulating personnel data to mislead investors. That is securities fraud. That is wrongful termination. That is everything. He thought he could buy me, I said. He thought $50,000 was enough to make me forget my integrity. He made a mistake, Vance said. He forgot that you are not the one who needs saving. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Elena. Meeting confirmed for 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Boardroom A. The Beatty leadership team will be there. We are ready. I looked at the city lights outside, the legal threats, the smears, the intimidation. It had all been a desperate smokescreen. Caleb Rourke had just handed me the match. Robert, I said, prepare the affidavit. I want that recording transcribed and attached to our formal response. For the lawsuit? Vance asked. No, I said, standing up. For the meeting tomorrow, I am not going to sue them. I am going to let them destroy themselves in front of the only audience that matters. The $5 had started it, but Caleb's confession had just finished it. They had built a glass house on a foundation of lies, and tomorrow morning, I was going to throw the first stone. Wednesday morning arrived with the heavy, electric pressure of a gathering storm. The deadline for the Crestline contract signing was less than 48 hours away, but the celebration had already been canceled. Now, it was just a question of how much damage the explosion would cause. I sat in my home office, my laptop screen split into two windows. On the left was a secure video link to the Crestline conference room, where Elena Markham and Graham Sutter sat like judges at a tribunal. On the right was the feed from Briarline Advisory Technologies. Caleb Rourke was not on the call. He was hiding. Instead, he had sent his VP of Engineering, a man named Marcus Thorne, and two senior architects I had never met in my life. This was the A-team they had scrambled to assemble overnight to prove they did not need me. Good morning, Elena said. Her voice was not polite. It was a weapon. We sent a demand yesterday for a demonstration of the continuity plan. You claim you have full control of the implementation architecture. Prove it. Marcus cleared his throat. He looked nervous. He was wearing a suit that looked like it had been pulled out of the back of a closet. Absolutely. Ms. Markham, we have brought in our most senior resources from the FinTech division to oversee the transition. They have reviewed the documentation and are fully up to speed. Excellent, Elena said. She did not look at her notes. She looked directly into the camera lens. I have 3 questions. If you answer them correctly, we proceed. If you hesitate, we terminate. Question 1. How is the legacy customer data being sanitized before it hits the new encryption layer in the sandbox? Marcus looked at the architect to his left. The architect blinked. Well, the architect started, his voice shaky. We utilize a standard AES 256 encryption protocol that wraps the data packets upon entry. Incorrect, Elena said. That is the storage protocol, not the sanitization process. The sanitization happens pre-ingestion to strip out the old mainframe formatting. Olivia wrote a custom script for it. Where is the script located? Silence. The architect typed furiously. We would need to check the repository, Marcus stammered. Strike one, Elena said. Question 2. What is the failover latency we agreed upon for the Texas server node in the event of a power loss? Standard industry practice is 4 nines, Marcus said quickly. So, 99.99% uptime. I did not ask for the uptime, Elena corrected. I asked for the latency. The answer is 12 milliseconds. Olivia negotiated it down from 50 because our trading desk cannot handle the lag. You are quoting me a brochure, not a spec sheet. Strike 2. Marcus was sweating now. I could see the sheen on his forehead, even through the pixelated video feed. Last chance, Elena said. What is the name of the third-party key manager we use for the dual authentication login? The 3 men looked at each other. It was a trick question. We did not use a third-party manager. I had built an internal one because the external vendors were not compliant with Crestline's specific risk profile. Auth 0, one of them guessed. Elena reached out and tapped a button on her console. The screen went black. Meeting adjourned, she said to the empty room. 10 minutes later, I was no longer an observer. I was a participant. I sat in a private office at Crestline headquarters, 20 floors above the street. Graham Sutter placed a document in front of me. It was printed on heavy, watermarked paper. This is not a draft, Graham said. This is the final offer. I read the title. Senior Director, Technical Partnerships. I scanned the compensation package. The base salary was 40% higher than what I was making at BAT. The signing bonus was $30,000. But the most important line was at the bottom, under the heading Authority. The Senior Director retains full veto power over vendor selection and compliance adherence. This role reports directly to the Chief Operating Officer. We are not just hiring you to finish this project, Graham said, pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. We are hiring you to make sure we never get held hostage by a company like BAT again. You will build the team. You will set the standards. You are the gatekeeper. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy, substantial. I signed my name. Welcome to the other side of the table, Olivia, Graham said, clinking his glass against mine. My phone buzzed in my purse. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. I checked it. It was an email from Melissa Ray, the HR director at BAT. The subject line was Urgent Temporary Consulting Arrangement. I opened it. The desperation wafted off the screen. Dear Olivia, in light of recent discussions, we are prepared to offer you a 1-week emergency contract to facilitate the handover. The rate is $5,000 per day. Please see the attached agreement. I forwarded the attachment to Robert Vance. He replied within 30 seconds. Do not sign this. Look at paragraph 4. I scrolled down on my phone. Buried in the middle of a paragraph about intellectual property was a sentence written in dense legalese. By accepting this engagement, the contractor agrees to release Briarline Advisory Technologies and its officers from any and all claims, liabilities, or causes of action arising from her previous employment, and agrees to a perpetual non-disparagement clause regarding all company operations. They did not want me back to work. They wanted me back to silence me. They were willing to pay me $25,000 for a week of work, but the real product they were buying was my signature on a liability waiver. I replied to Melissa, my rate is not available, and my integrity is not for sale. I blocked her address. I walked out of the office to get some air. I stood in the hallway, looking out at the Dallas skyline. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I did not recognize, but I had a feeling I knew who it was. I answered. Olivia. The voice was ragged. It sounded like a man who had not slept in 3 days. Derek, I said. They locked me out, Derek said. He wasn't shouting anymore. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrifying clarity. They cut my access cards. They wiped my phone remotely. I am sitting in my car in the parking garage, and security just told me if I don't leave in 5 minutes, they are calling the police. You made your bed, Derek, I said. No, he said, his voice cracking. You don't understand. I didn't want to fire you. I needed you. You think I care about $5? You think I care about a coffee? Then why? I asked. Because the directive came from the top, Derek whispered. From the investors, the new lead investor for the Series C. They looked at the cap table and the payroll. They said we were too heavy on legacy costs. They wanted the implementation done cheap. They wanted the expensive senior staff gone so the margins would look better for the IPO next year. So you sacrificed me to pad the EBITDA, I said. They told me if I didn't cut costs, they would cut me, Derek said. Caleb signed off on it. The CFO signed off on it. I was just the guy holding the knife, and now they are blaming me for the blood. Who is the investor? I asked. I can't say the name, Derek said. If I say the name, I lose my severance. I lose everything. But Olivia, check the board minutes from last month. Check who introduced the new compliance auditing firm. It's all the same circle. Why are you telling me this? Because they are going to try to pin the data breach on you, Derek said. The forged signature, I didn't do that. That was Caleb. I refused to do it. That is why they suspended me. I am a lot of things, Olivia, but I am not a felon. Watch your back. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the information. Derek Voss, the man who had humiliated me, was now just another casualty of the machine he tried to serve. I walked back into the conference room. The mood had shifted. The air was colder. The entire Crestline board of directors was now on the screen. 12 men and women, sitting around a massive table in New York. They looked grim. We have reviewed the risk assessment report, the chairman said. His voice boomed through the speakers. The findings are unacceptable. The reliance on a single vendor who has demonstrated a pattern of deceit, security negligence, and fraudulent representation poses an existential threat to this institution. We are in agreement, Graham said. We cannot proceed with BAT. We are not just not proceeding, the chairman said. We are going to make a statement. The market needs to know that compliance is not optional. Then, a woman at the far end of the table in New York raised her hand. It was Evelyn Sterling, the head of the audit committee. Before we vote to terminate, Evelyn said, I want to share something that landed on my desk this morning. She slid a black folder across the table. We have a contact at the venture capital firm that was leading BAT's funding round, Evelyn said. They got cold feet when they heard about the audit. They sent over the pitch deck BAT used to solicit the funds. Graham zoomed the camera in on the document. Turn to page 10, Evelyn said, on the screen. I saw a chart titled Proprietary Technology Assets. They claim here, Evelyn said, reading from the document, that their automation software is fully patent protected and developed entirely in-house by their RD team. Graham looked at me. Olivia. I shook my head. That is a lie. The core engine is built on an open-source library. We modified it, but we don't own the patent. If they claimed they own the IP, they lied to the investors. And here, Evelyn pointed to another bullet point, they claim they have a 10-year exclusive contract with Crestline. We signed a 5-year contract, Graham said, his eyes narrowing, with a 3-year breakout clause. So they doubled the value of our contract to pump up their valuation, Evelyn concluded. They lied about the technology, they lied about the revenue, and they fired the only person who would have refused to go along with it. The room was silent. This wasn't just a bad vendor anymore. This was a Ponzi scheme built on software. We have everything we need, the chairman said. Graham, notify them. The deal is dead. And send this file to the SEC. I want their funding round frozen by the end of the business day. I looked at the screen. I saw the faces of the people who ran the financial world. They weren't angry. They were decisive. They were cutting out a tumor. And I realized then that I wasn't just a witness. I was the scalpel. Olivia, Graham said, turning to me, we are going to draft the termination notice. It goes out tomorrow morning, Monday. The day they thought they would be popping champagne is going to be the day the lights go out. I will have my team ready to take over the migration, I said. We don't need them. We can build it better ourselves. One more thing, Graham said. When we send the notice, I want your name on the CC line. I want them to see it. I want Caleb Rourke to see your name next to mine and know exactly who ended this." I nodded. "Put it at the top," I said. The sun had set over Dallas. The city was a grid of lights, indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere out there, Caleb Rourke was probably practicing his victory speech for Monday. He had no idea that the mirror was already being held up to his empire, and the reflection was about to shatter. Monday morning arrived with the sterile precision of a scheduled execution. The sun was shining over Dallas, bright and indifferent, but inside the main conference room of Briarline Advisory Technologies, the atmosphere was funereal. I wasn't in that room physically. I was sitting in a high-tech boardroom at Crestline Trust and Holdings, 20 floors up and 3 blocks away. My new badge, printed only an hour ago, sat on the table in front of me. It read, Olivia Ross, Senior Director, Technical Partnerships. On the massive wall-size screen in front of us, the video feed from BAT flickered to life. They had assembled the War Council. Caleb Rourke sat at the head of the table, flanked by his general counsel and the new head of HR. Derek Voss was there, too, sitting at the far end, looking like a man who was trying to shrink into his chair. They were all wearing their best suits, the armor of corporate desperation. They had prepared speeches. They had prepared apologies. They had prepared a narrative about miscommunications and administrative errors. They had no idea that the narrative was no longer theirs to write. "Good morning," Caleb began, his voice projected through the surround sound speakers. He forced a smile that looked painful. "Graham, Elena, thank you for making the time. We want to start by addressing the friction of the last few days. We have a comprehensive plan to get the implementation back on track, and we are prepared to offer significant concessions on the first-year service fees to demonstrate our commitment." Graham Sutter didn't smile back. He didn't even blink. He sat with his hands clasped on the table, exuding the terrifying calm of a man who holds all the aces. "Caleb," Graham said, his voice cutting through the pleasantries like a razor, "you can put the slide deck away. We are not here to negotiate service fees. We understand there are concerns about personnel," Caleb continued, ignoring the warning sign, "and we want to assure you that while Ms. Ross is no longer with us, the team we have assembled is—" "Stop," Elena Markham said. She leaned into the microphone. "We are not here to discuss your team. Caleb, we are here to invoke Section 8, Paragraph 4 of the Master Services Agreement." Caleb froze. "The key personnel clause." "Correct," Elena said. She picked up a document. "This morning, at 8 o'clock, our legal department filed a formal notice of termination for cause. The removal of the primary implementation liaison, Olivia Ross, without prior written consent from Crestline constitutes a material breach. Furthermore, the subsequent audit of your security protocols has revealed critical vulnerabilities that violate the compliance standards outlined in the request for proposal." "Now wait a minute," the Beatty General Counsel interjected, leaning forward. "Termination for cause requires a 30-day cure period. We have the right to remedy the breach. We can hire a replacement. In fact, we are in active talks to bring Olivia back as a consultant." "That will not be necessary," Graham interrupted. "We can fix this," Caleb pleaded, the sweat starting to shine on his forehead. "We can get her back. I know things were heated, but everyone has a price. We will pay whatever it takes to get her signature on the readiness certificate by the end of the day." Graham turned his head slightly and looked at me. "Olivia, do you think you will be signing anything for them today?" I leaned forward into the frame of the camera. For the first time, the men in the BAT conference room saw me. The color drained from Caleb's face so fast it looked like a medical event. Derek Voss stopped breathing. They stared at the screen, at the Crestline logo on the wall behind me, and at the badge sitting next to my hand. "Good morning, Caleb," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the anger I had felt on Friday. "I am afraid I cannot sign your certificate. As the Senior Director of Technical Partnerships for Crestline, it would be a conflict of interest for me to validate the work of a non-compliant vendor." The The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a reality shattering. "You," Caleb stammered, "you are working for them." "We didn't just hire her, Caleb," Graham said. "We built a division around her, because we realized that the only asset BAT had that was worth $120 million was the person you fired over a $5 coffee." Elena looked down at her tablet and tapped the screen. "As of 2 minutes ago, Crestline has issued a press release to the market. We are announcing our new internal strategic division. We are also announcing that we have severed ties with Briarline Advisory Technologies due to irreconcilable failures in governance and operational integrity." "You can't do that," Caleb whispered. "The market, the investors." "The market values transparency," Graham said. "And the investors, I believe they are receiving a copy of our audit report as we speak, the one that highlights the discrepancies between your pitch deck and your actual capabilities." The feed from the BAT conference room didn't cut out, but the meeting was effectively over. We watched as the chaos began. It started with a phone ringing in the background, then another, then the HR director's cell phone lit up. The dominoes were falling. Within an hour, the news had hit the wire. A major logistics firm, one of BAT's oldest clients, sent a formal request for an immediate contract review, citing the Crestline termination as a trigger event. 2 more mid-sized clients followed suit before lunch. They didn't know the details, but they knew the smell of smoke. And when a giant like Crestline runs out of a burning building, everyone else runs too. By 1 in the afternoon, the venture capital firm leading the Series C funding round pulled the term sheet. They didn't just withdraw. They threatened legal action for misrepresentation of assets. They had pledged capital based on a pipeline that just evaporated. The bank was next. BAT had a revolving credit line tied to their accounts receivable. When the Crestline contract, the collateral for the loan, was voided, the bank declared a covenant breach. They froze BAT's operating accounts. It was a total system collapse. I watched it happen from my new office. It wasn't violent. It was just paperwork. It was emails. It was the silent, crushing weight of consequences. At 3 o'clock, I received a text from Tanya. "They just fired Derek." She wrote, "Security came up. Caleb tried to blame the whole thing on him in front of the board. He said Derek went rogue with the firing to hide his own incompetence. Derek was screaming that he was just following orders. It was ugly. Olivia, exactly the same way they did it to you. But this time, nobody looked away. Nobody felt sorry for him. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a grim sense of balance. Derek had tried to destroy my reputation to save his bonus. Now, he was walking out with a cardboard box. Unhireable in a town where everyone talks. But the accountability didn't stop at middle management. At 5 o'clock, the news broke on the industry blog. The board of directors of Briarline Advisory Technologies had called an emergency session. Caleb Rourke was forced to resign, effective immediately. The internal audit triggered by the Crestline report had exposed the pattern of optimized compliance logs and the kickback scheme with the shell vendors. The empire of BIT wasn't destroyed by an outside force. It imploded under the weight of its own rot. I sat in my chair as the sun went down. The office was quiet. I had a team to hire tomorrow. I had a migration plan to draft. I had real work to do. My assistant, a young man named David, whom I had just met, knocked on the door. "Ms. Ross," he said, "I am heading out for a coffee run. Can I get you anything?" I smiled. "A latte," I said. "Oat milk." And David, "Yes. Put it on the corporate card," I said. "And make sure you file the receipt." "Of course," he said, confused by the specificity. He left. I swiveled my chair to look out the window. The lights of the BAT building were visible in the distance, but they looked dimmer tonight. People would tell this story for years. They would say I was the woman who took down a company for revenge. They would say I was ruthless. They would say I was a scorched earth strategist. But they would be wrong. I didn't destroy Briarline Advisory Technologies. I didn't plant the bomb. I didn't light the fuse. They built a skyscraper out of lies and greed, and they used me as the load-bearing wall. All I did was step out of the way. I took a sip of the water on my desk, opened the first email from a new partner who wanted to work with us, and began to type. The $5 was never the price of the coffee. It was the price of admission to the truth. And the truth had finally been delivered. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a wild ride from that first insulted moment in the conference room to this final vindication, and I really hope you enjoyed the journey as much as I enjoyed sharing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute, at your desk, or maybe winding down at home? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'd love to chat with you. Please do not forget to subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that sometimes the good guys do win. Stay safe, stay smart, and never let anyone undervalue your worth.